In this video, you're going to learn about two very important concepts for being successful inside Kubernetes, and those are liveliness and readiness. So the goal of a system like Kubernetes and other container orchestrators is to keep your deployment alive. It's not just to start 3 containers and then go away and say that is my job done. It is to keep 3 containers running indefinitely. This might mean that they need to be recreated because of something happening inside your infrastructure. So a node or a server could need rebooted, or it could be decommissioned because of hardware failure, and the containers will be moved. But it's also the case that it could be your application that crashes. And in that case, it wants to recreate it. But how does Kubernetes know that your application is alive? Well, the most basic form of your application being alive is the process is still running. Typically, your Java process will be the only process inside your container. And if you don't specify anything about liveliness to Kubernetes, that's the liveliness check you'll get. It will consider your application alive if the process still runs. But we can do better than that. In addition to liveliness, there's also readiness. So just because your process is up and running, is it ready to serve production traffic? Should your very important customer request be coming into your container as soon as it started? So let's have a think about that. So imagine we have an application, and the goal of this application is to serve some HTTP requests from your company's website. At what point can it do that? And at what point should Kubernetes consider your container alive? Well, the basic thing is that the process is running, but a better one might be that a port is open. So you could tell Kubernetes that consider this container alive as long as it's open port 8080. And if once deployed, it doesn't open that port within a very short amount of time, I want you to kill it and start again because something must be going wrong. But just because the port is open doesn't mean that we should receive traffic. We don't often build services that do nothing and don't interact with anything apart from, say, doing some computation. They typically have dependencies, and some of those dependencies are mandatory. So you might need to connect to a database to actually serve any useful functionality. So a really good concept of being ready is that database connection is initialized. There's no point receiving traffic into this application if we can't communicate with our database. But not all dependencies in for our application are mandatory. We could be communicating with a system like Kafka, and maybe we're sending audit data there. And if we lose the connection to Kafka, we might still be able to serve our customers. So that in that case, we wouldn't include the connection to an auditing system or Kafka inside our readiness check. So to summarize, liveliness check should be very basic. It's typically something like the port is open or the process is running. If your liveliness check fails, the ramification is that your process, your container, will be killed. If you can't connect to your database, there's no point killing the application container. It's probably a problem with the connectivity or the database itself. So we don't want things like database connection pools to be part of liveliness checks. On the other hand, readiness checks are more involved. That means we're ready to serve production traffic. We should have readiness check for our mandatory subsystems, but not for the optional ones. Whether something is optional or mandatory is up to you and your application. In the auditing example that I just gave, it might be mandatory in your company to do that auditing to serve your customers. And if so, you would also include the connection to Kafka as part of your readiness check. Liveness and readiness checks are defined inside your deployment YAML in the containers section. We haven't previously defined them, but the server app one that we've used in the previous example, we could add a HTTP, liveness, and readiness check that hits a certain path. You can also do things like a certain port is just open or a process is running. You can even just run scripts from inside your container if you need to do something a bit more complex. In the output of kubectl get pods, you can see whether pods are ready. So in the example here where we've got 2 pods in our server app deployment, we can see that one is ready and one is not. And that means that one of those pods, the readiness check hasn't been passing yet. So if we have a service for this deployment, The service will only route traffic to the pods which are ready. Readiness checks are vital for getting rolling redeployments right. A rolling redeploy is where we want to deploy a new version of our application, and we want to do it in a manner which results in no downtime for our customers. So rather than just deleting the old application and then starting up the new one or the new version, we delete one pod at a time and we add a new pod at a time. But the readiness check is vital in this process. So if we start off with 3 pods on, say, version 1, the way we would do, or the way Kubernetes does a rolling redeployment unless you change settings, is that it'll first create a container or a pod with version number 2. But it won't carry on, it won't delete a pod from the old version until the readiness check passes on the new one. So for a very brief period, rather than having three pods, 3 containers, we've got 4. Once that readiness check passes, then it's safe to delete one of the old ones. And this happens until all of the pods have been updated. So at this point, we'd be able to deploy a second pod for the new deployment. And once the readiness check passes, then one of the old ones can go away. If at any point the readiness check on the new pod doesn't pass, you remain in this state of mixed versions, but you're still at your full capacity. We've still got 3 pods serving production traffic. And then the final step for this deployment would be to create the third and final pod for the new version, wait for its readiness check to pass, and then delete the old one. So the takeaways for liveness and readiness is that you should always include them, particularly readiness. The default liveness of checking the process exists might be good enough. If you want to build and have complicated health checks for various subsystems, you don't need to start from scratch. There are lots of Java libraries out there for building health checks, where you can register lots of different health checks and it will group them together so you can expose them over, say, one HTTP point. Spring Boot has them. If you're using Akka Management has a system for doing health checks, so that you don't need to build this stuff from scratch. And getting readiness checks right is absolutely vital to having zero downtime deployments. You do not want production traffic coming into your service until it's ready to serve it. And that's especially important for the timings of when you're doing rolling redeploys.